It can feel lonely when you're dealing with rejection, so knowing someone is listening on the other side creates a sense of warmth and understanding. Let's be honest, rejection hurts. It can leave you awake at night, replaying conversations and wondering where things went wrong. It can also linger in the back of your mind, creating a constant nagging doubt about your abilities. The encouraging news is that there's a way to turn that negative feeling into a powerful tool for growth. Picture a moment when someone turned you down. It might have been a friend who didn't have time to listen, or maybe a job you were sure you'd get but didn't. That sting is hard to forget. Yet ancient perspectives suggest that rejection can sharpen our sense of who we are if we let it. These ideas trace back thousands of years to those who believed adversity holds a mirror, revealing both our fears and untapped reservoirs of courage. I'd like to share a set of thoughts that can shift your view of rejection. Each idea can stand alone, but combined, they form a lens that helps you see this experience as more than just a closed door. My hope is that you'll find at least one concept here that changes how you respond the next time you hear no. It's understandable if that seems too optimistic, especially if you're still reeling from the last disappointment. I'm not here to dismiss your pain or brush aside the very real heartbreak that comes with feeling turned away. I simply want to offer a path that countless people have walked before us. One that focuses on how our mindset shapes our reactions. There's something to be said about looking back at times you faced rejection and noticing how those moments shaped you. Perhaps you discovered a skill you hadn't realized you possessed, or you found a new path that turned out better than your original plan. It's not always obvious right away. Sometimes it takes a while for the bigger picture to emerge, but with a bit of patience, you can see how the pieces fit together. I'll invite you to pause if you ever feel overwhelmed. These thoughts are meant to stir reflection, and it's natural for your mind to drift. Let it wander, then gently bring it back when you're ready. If you're enjoying this conversation, tapping the like button or sharing a thought in the comments can help others find a bit of solace too. It reminds them they aren't the only ones feeling this way. Lesson number 1. Control what you can. Let go of what you can't. It might sound simple, but this concept is often tested when rejection strikes. Suppose you've poured your heart into a project and the response is lukewarm at best. You might feel the urge to control others' perceptions, maybe by explaining yourself further or endlessly revising your work to please everyone. That anxiety can build until you're constantly second-guessing every move, desperately trying to sway opinions that are fundamentally outside your grasp. Focusing on what's actually in your control shifts the pressure. You control how much effort you put in and how gracefully you respond, but not how someone else reacts. It can feel tough to accept that boundary, especially when you crave approval, but realizing that external reactions are out of your hands can free you from a lot of stress. This doesn't mean giving up on your goals. It just means directing your energy toward what truly makes a difference: your actions, your attitude, and your openness to learning. Imagine a friend who decides they'd rather hang out with a different circle. You can spend hours agonizing over what went wrong or replaying every conversation in your mind. But all that energy doesn't change the fact that they made a choice. What you can do is look inward. Is there something you could improve or learn from this? If so, do it for your own growth, not as a way to win them back. If their mind is set, trying to force a different outcome will only lead to more frustration. Shifting your perspective toward what's within your sphere of influence can feel like a weight being lifted. It reminds you that your sense of worth doesn't hinge on that person or opportunity. You can walk away knowing you stayed true to your values, and you can let that be enough. If they come around later, it's because they chose to, not because you twisted yourself into knots to please them. Of course, changing old habits isn't instant. You might catch yourself spiraling into what-if scenarios or replaying someone's words on a loop. When that happens, Pause and gently bring your focus back to the present. Ask yourself what's actually within reach right now. Maybe it's deciding to go for a walk, picking up a book to learn a new skill, or simply acknowledging that you can't control another person's thoughts. Recognizing that difference can be oddly comforting. If you ever feel discouraged, remind yourself that being mindful of your own reactions is more powerful than any external approval. It shifts your center of gravity inward, making you less vulnerable to every whim of the outside world. That's the essence of this first lesson. Choose to direct your energy where it can genuinely spark change and let go of the rest. Lesson number 2. Rejection is feedback, not failure. There's often a sense of finality wrapped up in the word no. It can land like a gavel, striking a table, making you feel as though you're being dismissed outright. That heaviness can lead you to question your abilities or even your worth. Yet what if no simply means not this way or not right now? When you think of it that way, it becomes more of a nudge towards something else rather than a declaration that you're incapable. If you pause long enough to look for the lesson behind that rejection, you might discover there's room to adapt, refine, or even explore a different path altogether. Imagine someone who sends out countless applications for jobs they're only half interested in. Each rejection letter stings, but it also reveals something. Maybe it indicates that their skill set isn't matching the positions they're chasing, or that they're not conveying their passion effectively in interviews. Viewed as feedback, those letters become signals about where to improve. It's a shift in perspective that has the power to free you from feeling crushed by defeat. Instead of taking each no personally, you start treating it as a hint about what to try next. This mindset doesn't erase the initial disappointment. Hearing, "We don't feel you're the right fit," can still bruise your confidence, and that's okay. Let yourself feel the sting. After all, it's part of being human. The key is not to linger in that place of hurt. Once the waves of emotion recede, look at the rejection through fresh eyes. Ask yourself what it's showing you about your approach, your strategy, or even the direction you're heading. Sometimes it's the wake-up call needed to adjust your goals. There's a story about an artist who kept hearing no from galleries. The rejections piled up to the point where it felt almost absurd. Each time, the artist paid close attention to the reasons given. Some mentioned the style wasn't quite fitting their audience. Others wanted a more cohesive collection. Rather than quitting, the artist refined techniques, created a unified body of work, and became more intentional in choosing which galleries to approach. Eventually, acceptance letters started rolling in. That happened not because the artist was suddenly a different person, but because each no had served as valuable insight for growth. Feedback can be hard to accept, especially when emotions run high. It's much easier to interpret a no as a personal critique, but if you shift the way you see it, you might find yourself welcoming that feedback, not necessarily because it's pleasant, but because it holds clues that can guide you to a place that's a better fit. Look at each rejection with an inquisitive mind, asking, "What can I take from this?" The sting might linger a bit, but with the right perspective, it transforms from a roadblock into a subtle signpost. As we move to the next idea, keep in mind that every closed door might just be steering you towards something more aligned with your true path. Lesson number 3. Reframe rejection as redirection. It's easy to feel like everything is crashing down when an opportunity slips through your fingers. You might have imagined exactly how things would play out, only to watch that vision dissolve. It's natural to feel disappointment in that moment, but it can help to pause and consider the possibility that you're simply being nudged toward a better path. Sometimes we get so fixated on a particular outcome that we miss the subtle hints leading us somewhere more suitable. If you treat each no as a temporary detour rather than a dead end, you open up space for curiosity about where that new direction might lead. Think of a time when something you really wanted didn't work out. Maybe a school you hoped to attend rejected your application, or a relationship ended before you were ready. Looking back, you might see how that apparent setback guided you toward a career or connection that was a far better match. It doesn't take away the sting you felt back then, but it reveals how certain disappointments can become stepping stones when seen through a wider lens. The challenge is that in the heat of the moment, it's tough to see the big picture. Emotions can cloud your vision, tempting you to believe that this no is the final verdict on your abilities. Stoics often taught that what seems like bad luck at first can be the seed of something beneficial. They recognized that our initial perception isn't the whole story. That's why it's worthwhile to remind yourself that each door closing might guide you to an alternative you hadn't considered. If you approach life with this mindset, it becomes less about clinging to one possibility and more about embracing whatever emerges. This doesn't mean you stop caring or striving. It just means you allow for the idea that a closed door might protect you from going down the wrong hallway. You can experiment with this mindset by making a small shift in your daily thinking. The next time something doesn't go the way you planned, pause and say, maybe there's another path. You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt, and you don't have to dismiss any genuine frustration. Just let that simple statement open up a crack in your perspective. Over time, you may discover that many of your so-called rejections were actually detours, leading you to experiences that align more deeply with who you are. That realization doesn't erase the challenges, but it does make them feel more purposeful. Lesson number 4, practice voluntary discomfort. It might sound counterintuitive to seek out difficulty on purpose, yet there's a powerful reason to do so. Placing yourself in situations where you face manageable challenges or slight discomfort can prepare you for bigger obstacles down the road. By regularly stepping outside your comfort zone in small ways, you train yourself to handle the sting of rejection or any unexpected hardship with more poise. It's a way of strengthening your mental muscles before true adversity arrives, so you're not blindsided when life inevitably gets tough. One way to see this in action is to think about an athlete who adds a little extra weight during training sessions. That extra strain might feel tiring, but it's what builds endurance and resilience. If that athlete only ever did the bare minimum, they'd be unprepared for the pressures of a real competition. The same principle applies to daily life. Maybe you try speaking up in a situation where you'd usually stay silent. Or perhaps you challenge yourself to learn a new skill that intimidates you a bit. These small acts push your boundaries just enough to show you that you can handle more than you might believe. When rejection strikes, the person who has practiced discomfort is more likely to bounce back quickly. It's not that they don't feel the sting, it's just that they've tasted difficulty before and understand they can come out stronger. It's like a subtle form of inoculation. Instead of living in fear of hearing no, you develop the mindset that says, I've faced hard things before, and I'll handle this too. Some people worry that deliberately facing discomfort could make life less enjoyable, but the opposite often happens. By testing your limits in controlled ways, you become more confident in your ability to adapt. That confidence can free you to embrace opportunities you might otherwise avoid. Even if they don't work out, the sense of self-reliance you gain is a reward in itself. It might also help to keep a small journal of your experiences with voluntary discomfort. Each time you do something slightly challenging, jot it down and note how it felt. Over time, those entries become proof of your growing resilience. Rejection can lose much of its power over you when you've already built up a tolerance for discomfort. You realize that temporary setbacks are just that, temporary. You also learn that disappointment, while unpleasant, is not a permanent condition. It's more like a passing storm that can eventually give way to clearer skies. By deliberately facing small challenges, you tell yourself, I won't break under pressure. That self-assurance isn't arrogance. It's the quiet trust that no single rejection can define your worth. Lesson number 5. Detach from external validation. We live in a world where likes and praise can feel like the ultimate affirmation, yet relying too much on that outside approval can set you up for heartbreak when acceptance doesn't come. It's only human to crave validation, especially if you've poured your heart into something and want to know it matters. The trouble is, once you make other people's judgments your main measuring stick, you're handing them control over your emotional balance. When rejection happens, and it will at some point, you might feel as though your entire sense of self is on trial. Picture that scenario where you pour effort into a creative project or a proposal at work. If you've tethered your self-esteem to others' responses, a negative review can hit like a truck. One harsh word has the power to overshadow all your genuine talent and effort. This doesn't mean you shut yourself off from all opinions, but it does mean you can learn to hold them loosely. There's a difference between listening to feedback for growth and placing your worth in the hands of someone else's appraisal. You might notice that people who found a way to ground their confidence internally seem less rattled by rejection. It's not that they're oblivious or that they don't feel disappointment. They simply acknowledge that external opinions shift like the weather. One day, everyone applauds you, and the next, they're criticizing. If you chase applause, you'll run yourself ragged. If you run from criticism, you'll never stretch beyond a narrow comfort zone. Detaching from external validation can start with small steps. Maybe you turn off notifications for social media and check feedback only at set times. Or you make a conscious effort to celebrate your own improvements instead of waiting for someone else to say you did well. Think of it as building a sturdy inner framework that can withstand the winds of rejection. Every time you remind yourself that your value isn't tied to that job offer or that person's opinion, you reinforce that inner stability. Rejection can still sting. That's normal. But when you know deep down that your worth isn't determined by any single viewpoint, it loses some of its power to shake you. Your core remains intact, supported by the knowledge that you're more than someone else's yes or no. Over time, this outlook frees you to take bolder risks and explore new horizons. You may stumble upon something remarkable precisely because you stopped letting external judgments define what you pursue. Lesson number 6. See rejection as a test of resilience. It's fascinating how certain moments in life seem designed to challenge you right where it hurts most. Rejection can be one of those moments. You might feel like the ground has shifted beneath your feet, leaving you uncertain and uneasy. Still, there's something transformative about meeting that uncertainty with the mindset that this is simply a test of resilience. Instead of seeing a no as an ending, you can treat it like a training session for your inner strength. One way to look at it is by picturing a tree in a storm. The wind whips through the branches, testing how deeply rooted it is. If the tree stands firm, it emerges tougher after the storm passes. Similarly, each rejection can prompt you to ask, how can I grow more grounded? Maybe it's by refining a skill or by learning to separate your identity from external events. When you embrace rejection in this spirit, it stops being a personal attack and starts feeling like a rite of passage that shapes you into a more capable individual. It's important to allow yourself a moment to acknowledge the hurt. Brushing it off with forced positivity can leave unresolved feelings lingering in your mind. But once you've processed that initial sting, you can shift your focus toward what you learn in the aftermath. If you treat each disappointment as part of your personal development, you begin to build a habit of rising up after being knocked down. Over time, you might even notice that scenarios which once rattled you no longer carry the same weight. You've been through similar storms before, and you know you'll stand strong again. That realization can be empowering. Each time you weather another disappointment, you're training yourself to handle future obstacles with greater calm. You become the kind of person who acknowledges setbacks without surrendering to them. There's a quiet confidence in that approach, a sense that your spirit can't be broken simply by someone's refusal or a door closing. Instead of letting that no define you, you use it as momentum to keep moving forward, more resilient than you were before. Lesson number 7. Embrace the power of amor fati. There's a unique shift that happens when you stop fighting against life's disappointments and begin to accept them as part of your journey. The phrase amor fati captures this sentiment perfectly, encouraging you to embrace everything that comes your way, the good and the painful, with an open heart. It doesn't mean you have to pretend the hurt feels wonderful. It means you recognize each setback as woven into the fabric of your life, nudging you toward growth and deeper understanding. Picture yourself standing in the rain without an umbrella. Your first instinct might be to run for shelter or curse the weather, but amor fati suggests finding a way to welcome that rain and see its value, even if it soaks your clothes. Rejection often feels like a downpour that shows up unexpectedly, leaving you cold and upset. Yet if you decide to accept that storm as a natural part of life, you begin to see it differently. You might notice lessons hidden within each raindrop, perhaps resilience you didn't realize you had, or a new direction that never would have occurred to you under sunny skies. When you embrace this outlook, it can shift the way you approach every endeavor. You stop viewing rejection as some cosmic punishment and start seeing it as a necessary brushstroke in the canvas of your life. It doesn't have to be pleasant, but it does have significance. By loving your fate, you allow yourself to release the tension of wishing things were different. That release opens you to the wisdom of the moment, letting you respond rather than react. If you find yourself wrestling with the idea of welcoming hardships, remember that it's a practice, not a flick of a switch. You might start small, noticing minor inconveniences and reminding yourself they're part of the grand tapestry. From there, you can build the kind of mindset that faces bigger challenges without being overwhelmed. Over time, you'll discover that rejection, like everything else, has a role to play in shaping who you become. By choosing to say yes to all of it, even the parts that hurt, you end up creating a sense of peace and acceptance within yourself. Lesson number 8. Don't personalize rejection. It's natural to feel a personal sting when someone says no, especially if you've invested a lot of energy or emotion into whatever is being turned down. You might immediately wonder what's wrong with you or assume it reflects some deep flaw in your character. Yet most rejections are not an ultimate judgment on who you are. They're more like indications that, in that specific instance, things just didn't align. That's why it helps to remember you're not the rejection itself. You're a person with countless qualities and potential that no single refusal can fully capture. Imagine trying a new hobby and receiving harsh feedback from someone who barely knows you. It's easy to let those words spiral into self-doubt, as if their dismissal represents the total truth about your abilities. But if you look closer, you'll see their response may be colored by their own preferences, biases, or expectations. That person's single viewpoint isn't the sum of your worth. By creating a boundary between your sense of self and any external critique, you allow yourself to learn from the feedback without letting it overshadow everything you are. This approach becomes even more important when dealing with major life events, like being turned down for a job you truly wanted or feeling overlooked by someone you care about. You might initially interpret that no as an echo of past insecurities, reinforcing negative stories you tell yourself. The challenge is to slow down, breathe, and recognize that this rejection is simply a result of timing, circumstances, or mismatched needs. It doesn't automatically negate the qualities that make you who you are. If you're in the habit of taking rejection personally, try a short reflection exercise. Whenever you face a no, ask yourself if the situation is rejecting your entire being or if it's aimed at a specific piece of work, a skill level, or a preference. By separating the event from your identity, you keep rejection in perspective. It can still hurt, but it doesn't become a statement about your overall value as a human being. Instead of letting that sting linger too long, you can then shift your focus to what truly matters, growing, adapting, and remembering you're more complex than any one verdict. Lesson number 9. Use rejection as a teacher. It can be tempting to bury your disappointment and move on as quickly as possible whenever someone says no. There's a momentary relief in trying to forget it happened, as if the sting might disappear if you ignore it. Yet there's also a hidden opportunity in allowing yourself to examine the rejection more closely. Think of it as an invitation to gather insights about your approach, your strengths, or even the assumptions that led you there in the first place. It's not always comfortable to look back at what went wrong, but often that's where the most valuable lessons are found. Some people treat a rejection like a puzzle, dissecting each piece to see what makes it tick. If someone criticizes your work, can you pinpoint where their feedback might have a valid point? If you're let down by a friend, do you notice any patterns in how your expectations might have clashed with theirs? This isn't about blaming yourself or them. It's about seeing the situation with fresh eyes and asking what knowledge you can extract. Sometimes the lesson might be about honing a skill. Other times, it's about realizing you've been aiming at a target that doesn't align with your real passions. Rejection forces you to confront the gap between what you want and where you currently stand. That can feel humbling, but it can also spark growth. Perhaps the feedback helps you recognize weaknesses in a plan or an area of personal development you've overlooked. It's not that you're flawed beyond repair. It's that every rejection carries a clue about how to move forward with a sharper sense of awareness. If you find yourself getting defensive or upset when someone turns you down, try taking a few breaths and reminding yourself that every critique, whether fair or not, can reveal something you didn't see before. You don't have to accept every bit of feedback as truth, but you can sift through it for the portions that ring true. If you discover just one helpful point, that alone can direct you to refine your next steps. Over time, this habit of learning from each rejection builds a mindset where you're not just bracing for the worst, but actively seeking ways to improve. You become more adaptable and less haunted by the fear of failing, because you see every misstep as a chance to become more skillful, more aware, and ultimately more aligned with what you genuinely want out of life. Lesson number 10. Practice gratitude for rejection. It might feel strange to be thankful for something that stings so much. Yet when you choose to look at rejection as a catalyst for growth rather than an unfair punishment, gratitude can emerge naturally. Think of it this way. Each time someone says no, you're given a chance to step back and ask whether you're on the right path. Without those moments, it's easy to drift through life, never stopping to question whether your direction still aligns with who you are. When you pause and appreciate the lessons rejection brings, you shift the focus from what you lost to what you stand to gain. Instead of feeling bitter about not getting that job or that relationship, you might become curious about the new doors that open once you turn away from the old one. You might also discover inner strengths you didn't know you had, such as persistence, creativity, or the ability to find alternative solutions. Gratitude in this context isn't about pretending the disappointment vanishes. It's about acknowledging the silver linings that can appear in unexpected places. If you find this idea difficult, try starting small. Maybe you reflect on a past rejection that seemed devastating at the time, but led you somewhere better. Even a little hint of gratitude can begin to change how you approach future setbacks. You learn that no single no can trap you unless you let it. There's always a possibility that what feels like a barrier could eventually become a springboard towards something more meaningful. Over time, practicing gratitude in moments of rejection can lighten the emotional burden. It allows you to see beyond the immediate pain and tap into a sense of hope and curiosity. You might still wish things had turned out differently, but you'll also recognize that every twist and turn has its place in shaping your journey. Lesson number 11. Focus on the bigger picture. When disappointment hits, it's easy to get lost in the moment and feel like this one rejection defines everything about you. It can loom so large that it blurs your ability to see anything else. Yet sometimes the best thing you can do is step back and notice how small this single event might look from a wider perspective. It doesn't mean your feelings are invalid, but rather that there's more to your story than this one setback. A helpful way to approach this is by imagining your life as a long tapestry. Each experience, both the joyful ones and the painful ones, threads its way into the overall design. A rejection might form a darker thread, but even that can enhance the richness of the bigger picture. You're not just this one moment of disappointment, you're all the twists and turns that came before, and all the paths you have yet to discover. If you're wrestling with regret or a sense of being stuck, take a breath and shift your focus to what you want in the long run. Ask yourself how today's rejection might actually fit into a broader plan or a new direction. There could be an opportunity hiding in that moment of failure, an opportunity you'd never have spotted if things had gone exactly as you first hoped. It's not about ignoring the sadness that comes with hearing no. It's about balancing that sadness with a sense that this isn't your final destination. When you zoom out and see the entirety of who you are and where you're going, you begin to realize a setback doesn't mean you're unworthy. It simply means you're in the middle of a bigger journey, one that will include both detours and discoveries you can't yet predict. Lesson number 12. The power of perseverance. Sometimes the most important moment comes right after you hear no. That's when you decide whether to stop in your tracks or find a way to press forward despite the setback. Perseverance doesn't mean forcing yourself into situations that are genuinely unhealthy or unproductive. It means recognizing that a single rejection doesn't invalidate your broader goals or potential. It's a reminder that you have the capacity to regroup and keep moving, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. This doesn't happen overnight. Building perseverance is like exercising a muscle. You push a little farther each time until resilience becomes part of who you are. When rejection happens, your first impulse might be to give up. Yet if you pause and take a breath, you might find another pathway forward. Maybe you refine your skills, adjust your approach, or seek out a new environment that better fits your strengths. Each effort you make sends a message to yourself that your journey isn't defined by a single refusal. There's a sense of dignity in pressing on when things don't go as planned. It shows you're not surrendering your dreams to a temporary obstacle. You may stumble a few more times, and each stumble might prompt you to question your resolve. Yet those very stumbles contribute to a story of endurance that, in the end, can be far more meaningful than effortless success. Overcoming multiple rejections creates layers of strength, reminding you again and again that you can handle more than you once believed. One way to practice perseverance is to set small goals you can achieve consistently, even when you're not at your best. It might be a daily habit that edges you closer to your larger ambition, like writing a few lines each morning if you're determined to become an author, or practicing a new skill for 15 minutes a day if you're aiming to switch careers. These small victories add up, and when rejection strikes, you can look at the progress you've already made and realize it would be a waste to abandon it all now. Each moment you choose to persevere in the face of a no is a moment that shapes you. It gives you tangible proof that you can endure setbacks without losing sight of what matters most to you. Over time, this spirit of endurance can become your distinguishing trait, a quiet strength that sees you through the inevitable ups and downs of life. Lesson number 13. Build anti-fragility. It's one thing to bounce back from adversity, but it's another to come back even stronger than you were before. That's the essence of anti-fragility, a concept suggesting that challenges can help you grow in ways comfort never could. It isn't about merely surviving rejection, it's about thriving because of it. Imagine a plant that doesn't just tolerate rain and wind, but actually flourishes because of the stresses it encounters. Your spirit can work in a similar way, feeding on each setback to become more adaptable and robust. You start building anti-fragility by welcoming small hardships as part of your personal evolution. Whenever someone says no, there's a choice. See it as a wall that stops you, or view it as a reason to reevaluate, improve, and move forward. Each time you accept that choice and focus on how you can grow, you create a deeper capacity for resilience. You're not ignoring the pain of rejection, you're using it as fuel. Over time, you might notice you don't just withstand life's harsh winds. You learn to harness them, directing their force into something beneficial. A rejection in your professional life might spur you to master a new skill, or a personal disappointment might encourage you to develop greater empathy and patience. Anti-fragility is a process, not a finish line. Each setback can be a step toward discovering greater strength and resourcefulness within yourself. When you integrate this perspective, every no you hear transforms into a building block for a stronger foundation. You begin to realize that setbacks, though unwelcome, can spark innovation, determination, and a better understanding of who you truly are. Instead of fearing the next storm, you prepare for it, confident that you'll emerge not just intact, but enhanced in ways you couldn't have anticipated. I want to thank you for walking through these ideas with me, especially if you've stayed until now. It can take time for these thoughts to truly sink in, and that's okay. We've explored a lot of ways that rejection can become a catalyst for growth instead of a dead end. The next time you come face to face with disappointment, remember that you've got a range of strategies at your disposal. You can focus on what's in your control, gather the lessons in each refusal, and even find ways to strengthen your spirit so you come back more resilient than before. Each lesson might speak to you differently, depending on where you are in life. If you're feeling overwhelmed, you can go back to one particular idea that resonates most in this moment and let it guide your response. Perhaps it's the thought of not personalizing rejection, or maybe it's the notion that a locked door might actually be directing you toward a new, unexplored possibility. You never know where these seemingly negative moments can lead once you allow yourself to view them from a different angle. I understand that hearing someone say no can stir up fear or sadness. That's part of being human. Still, there's a certain liberating feeling in taking that very fear and turning it into a motivator. Instead of letting it keep you stuck, you can use that energy to refine your approach, challenge your assumptions, or explore an entirely fresh path. It's often in the wake of no that you discover hidden parts of yourself, talents, strengths, or desires you might not have noticed otherwise. If you found any of these ideas helpful, one way to support this journey is by leaving a comment below, sharing a moment when you faced rejection and how you dealt with it. Not only might it help you reflect on your own growth, but it could also provide encouragement to someone else feeling that same sting. And if you haven't already, tapping that subscribe button is a small action that can help keep us connected whenever you need another dose of encouragement or fresh perspective. Before we wrap up, take a moment to notice how you feel right now. Maybe there's a touch of hope or relief. Maybe there's still a twinge of doubt. Both are valid. The important thing is that you're here, willing to explore your reactions and how you handle setbacks. That willingness is a sign you're already moving toward a more resilient version of yourself. I appreciate you tuning in and taking these thoughts to heart. Even if you only remember one lesson from today's conversation, let it remind you that rejection isn't the ultimate verdict on your life. It's more like a push toward new directions, untapped strengths, and possibly even the best version of you that you haven't met yet. Take that in, give yourself a moment to breathe, and when you're ready, step forward with renewed confidence. The path ahead may not always be smooth, but every bump and every no can become part of the process that leads you to the right yes.